I'm back with Dr. Gideon Strauss, a former translator for South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Committee. He's now the Research and Education Director for the Christian Labour Association of Canada. You're obviously from South Africa, and you're critical of this school that's going on in Toronto that's, you say, is race-based, and that's a difference. You made that point to say the race-based is different than maybe cultural differences. Why is that so important? Because when I think about it, I think, hasn't Canada already gone down that road by how it treats First Nations people based on the race? What do you think about that?
It is an issue in Canadian life that I have difficulty with, and that I am learning to think about. I'm not adequately competent to really think through the issue of First Nations people in Canada to the same extent that I'm able to think about the issue of race in South Africa, because I did not grow up here. I've not spent the same intensity of thought on the issue, but there certainly are tremendous difficulties. And I think that this is something that Canadians should think about. Differences based on something that I think is extraneous and not directly connected with the character of a person, like the color of their skin, right, their race, I think is something that we should be very careful to exclude from our considerations of how we treat people politically and the way we arrange our society. Culture, the ways in which people choose to live, how they the values and the norms that they pursue and the goals that as communities they want to achieve, I think any country, any government needs to treat with tremendous respect and care.
Even in that, though, are there religious values that are maybe create more human flourishing than others? Are there some religious values that you would say seem to promote human flourishing, and some other religious values, even if they're the contained in the idea of religion, don't actually promote human flourishing, as you say? Do you find that?
I think there are different ways of thinking about the world and different ways about living in the world that lead to more or less flourishing. The way in which I think we have organized our lives in Canada at large is deeply shaped by the modern worldview, if you will, the way of thinking about the world that has its roots in the Enlightenment, in the European Enlightenment. And that has tremendous gifts and benefits for us. You know, I'm an asthmatic. And if I could not access the medication that I use on a daily basis, that's the result of scientific research that's rooted in that Enlightenment way of thinking, my lifespan would be significantly reduced and my quality of life would be much, much worse. But the modern way of thinking about the world, for example, denies the possibility of transcendence, something beyond the sheerly material. And so while we have all these material benefits, we don't necessarily have a deep sense of meaning, which people with certain kinds of religious views do have. And so I think, you know, if you compare a modern way of living with, say, an Orthodox Jewish way of living, or an evangelical Christian, or a Roman Catholic way of living, ways of living that are deeply rooted in some sense of transcendence, I think that those later kinds of living lead to more flourishing in ways that have to do with our sense of the meaning of life in a modern way. So
what do you do, though, with, I mean, again, going back to South Africa, here's a state, apartheid state, that grew out of Christian ideas. And yet, so how do you, they have an understanding of transcendence, and yet the downline is racism. So how do you make sense of that?
I think it has to do with what we are or who we are as human beings. You know, I don't think we can say, I'm a Christian believer. And I don't think I can say that, you know, Christians are entirely good and people who are not Christians are entirely wicked or bad. I think that good and evil cuts through the human heart. It cuts through every human heart. It cuts through every society. And so even when we, wave a banner of a particular religious view, that does not mean that we are free from the possibility of wreaking great evil. Now, I happen to think that apartheid Christianity was heretical, that it failed to follow the teachings of the Bible with regard to the dignity of the human person. But I still think that as Christians we have to take responsibility for that evil.
And you're saying, rather than just saying it's someone else's, you're saying Christians have to own that and say, yeah, we produced that. That's our fault. As I think about things like this, the World Cup in 2010, many people think that this is not going to go well because the country isn't stable enough to handle this. What will this look like? Project into the future a couple of years as you understand South Africa now. Are we on the right track?
Oh my goodness, I hope things go well for South Africa and for the World Cup in South Africa. And I hope that the various problems plaguing South Africa with regard to political corruption and crime and other concerns don't stand in the way of that being a successful event.
Do you think they might?
They might. I'm hoping that they don't. And I'm hoping that not so much because I particularly care for the World Cup. I care for the World Cup, but I don't care for it as much as what I want that country to flourish. You know, the World Cup is something that people will enjoy. It will bring delight and it will bring a sense of playfulness to the country, and those are good things. But this is a country that I love dearly, and it's a country where children are orphaned because of the AIDS epidemic. It's a country where tremendous unemployment and poverty plague people. I want to see those things changed for the sake of South Africans.
Thank you so much for coming on our show tonight, Gideon Strauss.
Thank you very much.
You can visit the Work Research Foundation website at wrf.ca. In addition, the Christian Labor Association website is clac.ca. Coming up.